Hey guys, welcome back to another Q&A. It is February 4th, 2020, and this week I have questions all over the place, so bear with me here. It was another one of those weeks where I tried to cut it off. People just kept asking questions, and I hate to not answer them all, so try to get through all of them. All right. So, first one is, what is the point nutritionally of grass-fed whey protein powder? There's so little fat that the EFAs would be insignificant either way, right? Yep, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, marketing, I'd say it's probably just kind of a marketing thing more than anything else. Um, the benefits is going to be in the fatty acid profile, and not just omega-3 fatty acids, because omega-3 fatty acids in something like steak, grass-fed steak, still pretty minimal. We're just talking about the overall fatty acid profile, omega-6 composition, what omega-9s are in there, and so on and so forth. Now, so in something that doesn't have a lot of fat, it's pretty much pointless. Probably just marketing to make it look cool. It's kind of like I've seen, like you see pastured eggs, and the whole egg has a yolk. Obviously, it has a lot of fat or higher fat content than pastured egg whites. Completely stupid. It's like pure protein. Doesn't really have any carb or fat content. Very, very minimal. So, yeah, wouldn't waste your money on that. All right. How to rebound coming off a show, going into an off season, or 12 to 10 weeks out from a national show. Well, those are two completely different scenarios that could potentially have very, very different answers. So that's a lot. There's a lot of discussion points there. That's actually kind of like a whole entire podcast in and of itself, really. I would suggest probably look at the reverse dieting episode. This is a reverse dieting rebound, whatever you want to call it. We're just going to call it that. That we did on Mind Body Broadcast, and that will help you with the post show. There's a lot of ways to go about that, and it's really going to depend on metabolic tendencies, psychological tendencies, what someone's goals are, what their body composition is coming up the shows, what their insulin sensitivity is like, there's a lot of things to consider. So it's really hard for me to say, do this, way too contextual. Now, if you're trying to rebound and go into a second show, also there's a lot of context, but, it really depends on how lean you are. If you are truly, stage lean for the first show, then you could potentially raise calories and eat into the second show. And a lot of the time, there'll be some metabolic adaptation there where you may raise food, reduce cardio, and you end up being leaner because, of course, you were probably downregulated initially, and as you eat up and reduce cardio, metabolic rate goes up. Inflammation probably goes down. You tend to start to look better, look fuller, get tighter, right? Now, if someone's doing two shows in a row and they're not tight enough for the first show, it might be a little bit different. You might not be able to get quite as dramatic of a rebound effect. Not 12, they say 10 to 12 weeks. That's still a decent amount of time, so you might need to get a little bit tighter in the first 4 to 6 weeks after the initial show, and then eat into the second show. How much? That there's literally no way for me to answer that. It's extremely contextual, and it's really just going to be based on the individual. But the biggest thing would be, were you actually stage lean for the first show? Do you need to get leaner for the second show? That's going to kind of determine what you're going to do in between the two. Because if you're not as lean as you need to be for the national level show, then you still have fat to lose. And in some people's case, if they're pretty close, within a few pounds, they could probably still eat up. And they're, like I said, those adaptations, their metabolism is going to start to creep up. Leptin levels are going to go up, and they're going to keep burning fat even though they're eating more. And they're probably going to look better. Like I said, inflammation will go down. They'll probably feel better. Training performance might be better. NEAT levels might go up. So all those things are going to contribute to fat loss and just looking better overall. But really just depends on how much fat they have left to lose. That's going to be the determining factor there for sure. All right, thoughts on collagen and its if it's scientifically proven to be beneficial. I couldn't really find any research on it, but I see people who push Vital Proteins collagen supplements. I've heard of Vital Proteins. I'm not sure which type of collagen they use. There are multiple types, primarily looking at types 1, 2, and 3. I mean, I could even look here on my screen. Vital Proteins, collagen peptides. I don't know if it says. Probably says in here. I don't know. Not really finding it. I'm sure it says somewhere. Bovine collagen, hyaluronic acid. I'm sure it says on here somewhere what type, but it's going to make me dig too much for it. But in general, there are potentially some benefits. It does seem that collagen, and specifically type 2, helps with immune response, helps lower inflammation, so could potentially help with joint health and overall well-being, I guess, or just how your joints feel, because collagen is a building protein for a lot of those tissues. So it might help in that regard. Keep in mind that when you consume a protein, it's going to be broken down into individual amino acids that's going to be utilized, right? So once it does that, its amino acid profile is kind of, it's not as important, right? Because now you have individual amino acids, your body's going to do different things with them. So the benefits are probably a little bit overstated, but it does, if you go to, I do remember looking at examine.com. I use them a lot for very objective research and analysis. And there is some benefit to immune response and inflammation. So yeah, it might help in that regard. It's definitely something that people could use potentially if they want to help with joint tissue repair, integrity of tissues that have collagen content, which is a lot of different things. So, also, I don't think it's a bad idea to have some collagen in the diet because of the glycine content. So glycine to methionine ratio is also important in overall health outcomes. So, that could be important because we typically have pretty high methionine content in the high protein diet. So that could be something to consider as well. All right. But they are obviously making a lot of money off them. So, they push them, right? All right. Thoughts on Lantus or combined insulin therapy year-round for type blood sugar control? I already answered this one to the individual that asked. So, and you guys can refer to the insulin episode that we did on the OPD podcast. So this one was already answered. But definitely check out that episode. We pretty much cover all things insulin and different analogs, how they would be used, and in isolation and combination, dosage adjustments, contextual stuff, all that stuff's there. So, all right. Can EAAs really make a significant difference in recovery and muscle hypertrophy? Really not sold on their usage, and to spend that amount of money, I would like to be convinced as I am with creatine monohydrate. Just wondering if it's worthwhile supplement to take. Well, worthwhile is where it gets tricky, because worthwhile really just depends on your budget and how much benefit you are looking to gain. they contain the essential amino acids that we need for protein synthesis. They have high leucine content typically when you're taking them in supplement form. That's going to help with muscle protein synthesis. That's a lot of what we're looking for, right? EAAs are typically said to be better than BCAAs because they contain all the essential amino acids. Yeah, I mean, these questions are hard for me to answer because I don't know what the person's budget is, and I don't know what they're looking to get out of it. I mean, is it going to pack tons of muscle on you? No. If you're eating, if budget is a concern, you don't want to spend the money on it, and you're eating within a couple hours of training, and you're eating after training with sufficient leucine content and complete proteins in both meals, probably not necessary. Okay, could you spice up and juice up the amino pools a little bit while you train by drinking them? Yeah, quite possibly. And it might help some, right? It might help some with recovery. People tend to report less soreness and overall better recovery. And obviously that could, I mean, you would think put 2 and 2 together, it's probably going to help with muscle growth, right? And tissue repair. So no, there's not as much research as there is on creatine monohydrate, but also if you eat plenty of creatine via animal protein sources, you probably don't need that either. I don't even really supplement with creatine anymore personally, just because I eat so much protein, and I personally don't notice any difference whether I use it or not. Really would just depend on how much their person's getting through their protein sources, meat specifically. So yeah, again, kind of another contextual question. I think I answered those. All right, let's move over to, I have one about inflammation. And this is a little bit more in-depth one. I was debating whether I wanted to answer this on the Q&A or in a separate video, but we'll take a stab at it, give you guys some good starting point. So here's a question to address. When is inflammation considered inflammation, specifically with the term that is so loosely thrown around? How do you determine that inflammation is truly the cause of health effect? What testing do you use to determine inflammation is significant? Can you give focus to some extremely broad strokes? Okay, so yeah. Yes, so I talked about this before in some different markers, and we know there's some basic things that we know, right? So we know that inflammation is an acute response that we need for muscle growth and tissue repair. I actually just posted yesterday about using NSAIDs and how that can potentially slow down healing of different tissues, not just potentially hypertrophy adaptations, but also things like bone healing, right? And other tissues that we might damage if you have an injury, for example. Now, we're talking about also inflammation within the body, and we know that it does all kinds of bad stuff when it's chronic. Wreck your GI tract and hurt different cells and different organs, and I mean literally any function within the body could be potentially damaged or worsened by inflammation. So how do we know that it's not just the amount of inflammation that we need for repair and immune response and these types of things versus amount that's damaging? Okay, so our body's really good at regulating this, right? That's what it's made to do. We have checks and balances. We have different acute inflammatory responses that will go up and down pretty rapidly to help control this. So some things we can look at. There are a number of markers. I've mentioned things like, I think he mentions it in here too. CRP and homocysteine. Those are ones I've mentioned and talked about before. But there are others. There are things like ferritin levels. There are IL-6 levels. There's a couple others. Fibrogen. Also like plasma viscosity, ESR levels. A lot of these are acute phase. Sorry, I got this damn hair on my face. A lot of these are acute responses, so they can go up and down relatively quickly. And you can measure a lot of these in blood, but again, here's what we would probably want to know is when we're looking at these markers, start connecting the dots. So realize that some of these inflammatory markers, or a lot of these markers, could be raised by things like infection, disease. Two different things. Infection can happen very quickly, and infection can be very short term. We could have an upper respiratory infection, right? Disease, on the other hand, could be something very serious, although that's a broad term, obviously. Now, health, if we have just like overall shitty health, like somebody feels really lousy, they're very burnt out, they have digestive issues, maybe they have maybe potentially adrenal function issues, they have any type of hormone imbalance potentially, so hypogonadal, or estrogen and progesterone ratios are off, or thyroid functions off, or all these things. So you have that going on, and then you also have very elevated inflammatory markers, and the person's very stressed. Now we have something there, right? We can see that there's probably a pretty strong correlation between the inflammatory markers and the actual issues at hand. So we know that, all right, this inflammation is probably causing a problem. It's probably not something that's just short term. It's probably something that's chronic, and it's probably causing an issue. So we have to connect the dots. I can't just go in and measure CRP on somebody, and if it's slightly elevated, we think that they're at severe cardiac risk, because like CRP, HS, so high sensitivity, for example, is often used as a cardiac risk marker. But it can also be, it's released into the blood, right? But it can also be inflammation from a lot of different things going on. It can be an immune response because the person's sick. And, you don't want to look at something and then freak out because they have a raised inflammatory marker. So now if they have multiple raised inflammatory markers and they aren't sick, really, or they don't have any like noticeable sickness, they do have other health issues, they just feel very off, very not normal, good, drained, whatever, they do have hormonal issues, whatever it might be, then we probably are on to something. So I mean, that's the best way that I can explain it, is that you have to look at things in the totality of the situation, and not just, oh, there's an inflammatory marker that's raised, they probably have this. Now, each inflammatory marker in and of itself has potentially different reasons that it might be raised. So you'd want to look at that marker and then research that marker specifically and think, all right, now, this person has elevated, I said CRP, right? This person has elevated CRP. All right, well, now do they also have other cardiovascular risk markers that are elevated? Do they have symptoms? Do they have anything else going on? Okay, maybe we want to look at this person's cardiovascular health as a whole. They mentioned homocysteine. Yeah, it can be an inflammatory marker, but it can also just be a marker of B vitamin deficiency. That's a common one that I see, or people that don't have enough intrinsic factor to metabolize or utilize these B vitamins, or people that have issues with methylation. So they need methylated B vitamins, and now their homocysteine's up. And we just fix that and their homocysteine drops, right? So, I mean, again, look at what the marker does, what it's for, and then also look at symptoms, look at other markers that could be interconnected with it, and then make an educated decision because of those things, not because an isolated marker is raised. So it's kind of a mouthful. I hope that answers the question, though. I think that's the best way that I can explain it without dumbing it down too much. And so hopefully that's helpful. Now let me scroll over here. Okay. Okay. A couple more. All right. Shit, That's not the first one, is it? Thoughts on continuous blood glucose monitors if you want to get a ton of data on what's happening without having to keep pricking fingers. Yeah, you could. Is it going to cause you to be... So here's the thing, blood glucose obviously fluctuates to a number of things. Meals, obviously. That's the biggest one that people look at as well. I eat, so my blood sugar moves, and it's going to go back down. But it also does fluctuate in any acute stressor, right? Like any short-term stressor, you get stuck in traffic and you get pissed off and you're yelling at the person in front of you. Your adrenaline goes up because there's neurotransmitter release. Your blood glucose is going to go up with it. So, are you going to be able to take these? You want to get a ton of data, okay? But are you also aware that it's probably going to move around a lot more than you think? Are you going to sit there and think that you are a diabetic because it's moving around like it is? So as long as you're aware of that, then I would say, yeah, it's fine. Like personally, I know that it moves around too much that I don't really care to know if it moves around as much as it does, right? I don't feel that that's necessary. I can look at trends through fasting glucose, postprandial glucose, maybe peaks after meals if I really need to, right? Or shorter term peaks, right? If I need to. Now, if you feel that you need that data, there's a time and a place that could be used, but I just don't, personally, I wouldn't want to do that for the reasons that I mentioned. All right. Proviron in off season worth adding to a cycle, or just go with Masteron? I'm not sure what the goal. I don't know what the goal of this is. Like for the DHT properties, I guess. Probably just use the Masteron. I mean, you're gonna get the same or similar properties with also some potential added benefits, since it's a little bit stronger. Because Proviron in and of itself doesn't really have any other benefits to it, right? I would need more context on that. I'm not exactly sure what they're trying to accomplish. Maybe aromatase control from the DHT, I'm guessing. So that's, yeah, give me a little bit more there. Thoughts on Nolotil use? Oh, okay. Well, I don't have any experience with it personally. I am familiar with what it is, what it does. I've researched it just because I'm just genuinely curious. I like to know about different compounds that are out there for sure. Nolotil is a prostaglandin. It's used as a pain reliever. I know it comes in oral form. Obviously, bodybuilders are using injectable form. And why? Because it causes swelling. Okay? So, massive swelling. I believe when I looked at it before, it was originally used in babies. They would inject it into organs or around organs to help them swell so they could operate on them easier because they're so small. But it's said to be localized. That's why you would use it, and it's probably going to be something that you would just use in a smaller muscle group, just because you want even distribution of it, right? And so biceps, triceps, delts, right? Obvious ones. Now maybe calves, but you would probably want to test it out first. Always something that's going to cause localized swelling like that. For sure, want to see what it looks like. From everything I've seen, most people report that it doesn't really cause any funky blur of definition or anything. You'd want to assess that for yourself. You'd probably want to try it out. Doesn't last very long, so night before show type of thing. Dosages are pretty all over the board. I've seen anything from 1 to 5 mLs in muscle heads. And also protocols vary in terms of multiple administrations per head. So, and that probably also depends on how big is the muscle area. So bicep, I've seen protocols that are going 3, top by the delt, center, lower, tricep, hitting all the heads. So, I mean, you would just want to try it out and probably start at a lower dose and see how the swelling affects you. Could be super painful. I know that people report it being super painful and making it hard to pose. So, there are some downsides there. Prostaglandin meds in and of itself, they're supposed to be a pretty safe type or safe class. However, I know Nolotil is not really used in the US, at least to my knowledge. I know it was banned in several countries, and I don't know if that's still the case or not, but it's legal in other countries. Obviously, it's manufactured somewhere pharmaceutically, so it's it's being used somewhere. Now, it's like side effect wise, the biggest one that I've heard, other than the other things I mentioned, just like not botching it, are white blood cell counts going way down and then like organ failure and kidney failure. But I mean, it's not supposed to be systemic, for one, and secondly, I've never actually heard of that happening to any bodybuilders from using it. I could be wrong. It could very well be possible. Not like I'm looking at autopsies or whatever. But combining it with things like a diuretic and water restriction or water manipulation, or overall dehydration, right? And something that could affect renal function, and already being on other other compounds that could affect renal function, that might be something to consider. Definitely, if you already have compromised renal function to begin with, or you're would be doing things that would compromise renal function, you add other things onto that could potentially be an issue, just because people know, like, kidneys, you don't fuck around with kidneys. They get fucked up, you're in trouble. They're very hard to fix. Though certain supplements have brought kidney function back to a certain extent, but yeah, you just don't. It's not something that you want to mess with. So yeah, pros and cons there. I guess kind of weigh your options in terms of that. There are protocols out there. I know they're floating around if you can get the stuff, and wherever it's not banned at, and yeah, see what happens, I guess. That's a disclaimer. I do not suggest any of that. Okay. What's the best method for controlling blood sugars and growing while on GH? Metformin, Lantus, combination of the two. Would like to find place for metformins for some of the health benefits in recent research. Yeah, well, they don't do the same thing. So metformin is not really like a super duper nutrient partitioning agent or insulin mimetic, really. It's more so controlling hepatic glucose output, right? So you could use it with insulin. It's not really, the two aren't going to conflict. Like, you don't take metformin and all of a sudden your blood sugar just dives. It's not how it works. So that's fine to combine the two. Now, using GH, if you listen to any of the podcasts, in and of itself, like, GH in and of itself doesn't really have much, if any, growth potential. Like, it needs to be used with insulin for the IGF synergy. And plus, your blood sugar is going to go up anyhow. You're just going to end up insulin resistant and, fuck yourself up because of that. And you won't even be able to eat sufficient amount of food anyhow, because your blood sugar is just going to go up. So, in that regard, yeah, Lantus is fine. I would refer back, like I said earlier, I would refer back to the insulin episode that was put out on the OPD podcast. We go over different analogs, different hypothetical ways that it could be used for the analogs in isolation, in combination, timing, dosage adjustment, so on and so forth, even anti-aging effects, and just from controlling blood sugar. So lots of stuff there. All that stuff is covered on there. But yeah, you could use both, but you would definitely probably want to use an insulin analog of some kind with it for blood sugar control and the fact that you want to grow muscle. So All right. Last one. When do you know it's the right time to become enhanced? I don't know. I mean, it's such a hard question to answer because I would venture to say that the reasons that people go that route are different. Some people are kind of, if they want to compete, they end up on, testosterone replacement. They kind of are stuck in that realm. Others, like, probably prematurely just jump on it because they have no natural base. They're just impatient, whatever. But also, like, at a point, natural growth potential is pretty much little to nothing. I mean, it's very, very small. And there's definitely a ceiling. So ask yourself, like, what do you want to do with competing? Like, what's the end goal? Like, what kind of outcome are you looking for? Realize that most males will become hypogonadal at some point in their life. At some age, it's going to vary person to person in terms of like when it actually happens. Doing things like this are definitely going to speed up the process, but you're probably going to end up on a testosterone replacement. So you're kind of, I guess if you look at it in that light, you're just kind of like speeding up the inevitable anyhow. So it's maybe doesn't seem as bad as it could be, though testosterone replacement versus a super physiological doses of these compounds is not the same at all, right? In terms of health outcome. But you could think of it that way. I don't know how to answer this because it's such a personal choice. Like, you'd have to really, like I said, you have to ask yourself, like, what do you want to accomplish? Do you understand risks involved? Are you a level-headed person that is sensible? Do you have the means to monitor your health via blood work, via, checking your blood pressure? If you're older, maybe doing things like calcium scores and EKGs. I mean, stuff that you probably want to do anyhow at a certain point, right? But all these things just become more essential, and everyone responds so much differently, and side effects are so much different for different people, and the dosing spectrum is so big. There's literally no way to say that. You obviously use the minimum to get the most out of the least type of thing, right? But it's such a broad thing. Like, people could take it and they could get a little bit and just like, that's it. That's it. And yeah, it might be it, because if you talk to someone like Dr. Scott Stevenson, right? That talks about different, like, what's actually happening at the gene level, and like what these compounds do at the actual gene level in terms of signaling, turning things on and off. And it's going to be such an inter-individual thing in terms of how people respond, that you might not get a lot. You might be like, well, that was not really what I expected. And unfortunately, like, that's just the reality of it for some people, and other people will get a massive response. So, and other people will get a very negative health response, and other people will get very little to any difference in health outcome, so all things to consider. But always, go into it as low and slow as possible. And that is it, guys. We're like 34 minutes. Holy cow. So I will cut it here, and appreciate the questions, and talk to you guys next time.